Okay, welcome back. We are going to keep the theme on energy. We're transitioning to a different region of energy production, but staying on theme. So we're very pleased to host this session on energy wealth of tribal nations. This session features 3 experts on mining and energy issues, and it's also 3 people who participate in Hoover's project on renewing indigenous economies. This is the project that Condi highlighted in her opening remarks. It's one that works with scholars and leaders, tribal leaders, to identify barriers to economic self-sufficiency and prosperity, both in the United States and globally. So there's a bit of a puzzle because energy and mineral resources are abundant, at least on many Indian reservations in the US. And by and large, they've earned small returns for tribes and for the country. This is one reason why poverty is still sadly prevalent on Indian reservations. So why is this the case? What might be done? What should be done? Are questions we'll address. So to help us unpack, we have 3 leading voices. We have CJ Stewart, who's the energy director of the Crow Nation, which is west of Billings, Montana. He has many accomplishments, and you can read them on his bio, but he may be the only participant in this conference who has been a coal miner. So CJ is a coal miner for 10 years, and he has a phrase that I've heard him say that I think he'll elaborate on, which is for the Crow to get out of coal, they have to mine coal. Rich Luarkie is the director of the Native American Mining and Energy Sovereignty Program at the Colorado School of Mines. Many other affiliations and accomplishments that are on his bio. But one thing that Rich has done is coined a phrase that I really like called solvereignty. Solvereignty. It's hard to say, but it's an interesting one to think about. And then, of course, Daniel Cardenas, who is the CEO, President and Chairman of the National Tribal Energy Association. Daniel has been integrated in our Renewing Indigenous Economies program. So he's been out at Stanford as part of this program. And I was able to spend time with his family in Wyoming a few months ago, which was a pleasure. So to prime my first question, I want to point out that tribes are supposed to be sovereign nations. And true sovereignty would insulate tribes, I would think, from happenings in Washington, D.C. It would make them a little bit insulated in principle from changes in policies, changes in presidential administrations, changes in the bureaucracy. So I want to start by asking if this has been true. Have tribes been insulated by federal politics and federal policy? And I want to start by asking CJ Stewart this question in the context of coal mining, coal development, coal energy. CJ, how have federal policies affected coal in your nation and in other tribal nations like the Navajo that had depended on coal? And what needs to change?
Well, I think I'll just go right into what needs to change, I think the federal government needs to be hands-off, allow us to grow, abide by their treaties. You know, in 1825, in fact, this year, August 4th, 2025, we are celebrating our 200th anniversary of our relationship with Uncle Sam. And so that means 49 years into the U.S. Constitution, since the Crow tribe became an Article I entity. You know, we became friends with the United States government. And in that agreement, that friendship treaty is mini NATO, agreement, basically stating that the Crow tribe will protect the federal government's trade routes, the representatives, their resource, their product, whatever. And in turn, the federal government is supposed to do that for the Crow tribe. Protect our representative, our trade routes, our product and resource. And so that's always been the understanding from the Crow tribe. And so, you know, we still have, within that agreement, we still have young men, young women serving in the military. In fact, we have the highest percentage of all Indian country for percentages of veterans. You know, we've served all the way back to my grandfather, White Man Runsome and Gozahead. They were both war chiefs. And White Man Runsome was the lead scout for General Armstrong Custer, George Armstrong. And so, with that being said, I mean, they were veterans, and we fought for our land. In fact, the Battle of the Little Bighorn was on Crow tribal land, and you know, don't let anybody tell you any different. I mean, you know, we outlined our property, you know, and there's a property description of all our treaties. And so, going back to your question, you know, how does this affect us? You know, I mean, it affects us drastically, you know, because there's the paternalism of the United States government. You know, they come in and, you know, there might be a hint of a market there, but yet they come in with mandates. And they tell us, you know, you got to do this, and this, and that, or another. And so it puts us in a position where we're reactive, you know. We can't be proactive to the market because we're reactive to the mandates of the United States government. And going to, you know, something that I heard the gentleman say, Mr. Tinker there, you know, kind of got me thinking about what I remember that they told me one time. You know, we got a lot of these environmentalists, and even within our tribe, you know, that don't really understand the full, you know, term of that, and so you got to catch the fish before you clean them, you know. But then you remember, we still have to dig worms to catch them. So there's a cause and effect. You have to do something to get something. You know, you can't go and say, we're not going to do this, but we're going to go and do this. No, it doesn't work that way. You know, in order to get to, you know, in order to travel this road of renewables, you have to go through Indian country. 90% of all the renewables, and I know some of those numbers that were on your guys' deal there, they're wrong. You know, 90% is on or in around Indian country's ancestral lands. You have to go through the tribes. Same way with the mandates for fossil energy. We have 60% of all fossil resources are controlled by Indian country, yet we're not at the table. The way the BIA runs things is if you got 51% signature or ownership within a parcel, you've got controlling interests of that property. Right? Makes sense? Okay. The Crow tribe is the largest private co-owner in the nation. Yet, we don't have a seat at the table when they're making decisions concerning the resource that puts food on our tables. And that goes to that. When I just heard the gentleman say, you know, the cleanest, you know, energy, the richest folks, they have the best of the best, basically. They get to afford that. And if you don't have that, then you're going to have to put out the fires that you can afford to do and still try to, you know, budget in, you know, the ability to make a buck off your resource so you can put food on the table for your people. And that's really what it is. You know, before we send that out there to the market, you know, our thinking is when we send our resource out to the market, it's going to generate wealth and subsidize the programs we have for our elders, our youth, you know, different folks, our entrepreneurs, you know, our environment. All of these things come when we have money. Yet, we have treaties that say that the federal government is going to help us in these areas, but they don't. And they put us in a position where we have to stick up for ourselves. And I bring this up only because it's true. when you stand up for yourself, and this last 4 years was tough. They came and they brought a mandate, to your question. They brought a mandate and they said, Crow Tribe, Navajo, and Hopi have to sign this MOU to transition away from coal. I advised my chairman and I told Granholm no. The White House then again got a hold of us, put together a meeting. We were on Zoom. And I told them no again. And they said, can we ask you why? And I said, well, first of all, we're an Article 1 entity of the United States Constitution. And there's such a thing called the Fair Takings Clause under Article 5 of the United States Constitution, where you're trying to have me get rid of my resource, sign it off, transition away from it, and I just get a data boy? No, that don't work that way. I said, it takes $8 per ton to produce $8 to produce 1 ton of our coal. And then you got to think about the 2.6 tons that 1 ton of coal creates of carbon. Now, if we round it down, then we add the tax, the carbon tax to that, that's $51 times 2. And we all know that there's still a 0.6 out there that I'm not, because I round it down. So we're looking at $110 a ton. And so I told the White House, as well as Granholm and DOE, that I said, might as well cut a check if you want us to get away from coal, cut it right now because the price is going up. We're at $110 a ton. Now let's better start thinking about this before I monetize the value of our resource, and all our rare earth is in that ash. And so they got upset, they backed off, and they put the Crow Tribe under critical high risk and no pay, meaning that we could not go after any funding, even the money that's owed to the Crow Tribe. We couldn't receive that, we couldn't draw it down, and then they turned around and they said, they had the nerve to say, go after grants. I can't go after grants. And the phrase that the gentleman stated was, we need coal to get out of coal. You want us to get out of coal? We need coal to get out of coal. And the reason why I say that is because 85% of all our grants were matching grants. Our general fund, the resource revenue, is 65 to 70% of our general fund was supported by our resource revenue. So if they want us to go after grants, we're going to need resource revenue, because 85% of the grants that they pose to us are matching. And so where's the logic in all this? It was a spit in the face. It was a total disrespect. And I bring it up because when you speak up for your tribe and you stand up for your tribe, there's only one word they use, and that they use it for Indians. They don't do that for the white folks, our black brothers, our Spanish brothers, or whatever. They don't do this. They don't use this word. But when you stick up for your people and you stand up and you say, no, this is not the way we want it. This is the way we're going to do it according to our sovereign authority. Well, guess what? The word they use against guys like that is hostile. You think about that. They don't use that on any other person, on any other ethnic race. And yet, we're dealing in a day and age where everyone's talking about discrimination. And yet they forget about their Indian brothers and sisters that are living with systemic racism. They told us to become farmers. We became farmers and we were good at it. They said, oh, we better not do that. They're getting too dang good. So they cut us off from Indian policy there, and they said you have to be a passive royalty owner. Sit back and get a check. Get some cheese, some rice, whatever, we'll bring it to you. That's what the U.S. government has done. You want to look at failed socialism? Go to a Crow reservation. Go to the nearest reservation. You want to look at failed communism? Go to the reservations. This is where they test their policies when they want to implement it outside of the U.S. They come to the reservations and they implement that. So, to your question, yes, it really affects us.
So Rich and Daniel are co-authors on a recent paper in the journal Science, and it makes the point that Indian country is completely stocked with critical minerals. The stats I remember was 60% of the nation's cobalt and lithium are near an Indian reservation, 90% of nickel and copper. These are important for various energy and defense technologies, and they lie beneath Indian country, so much of it. So I want to ask Rich and Daniel, what needs to happen for tribes to benefit from these minerals? And if tribes benefit, how does that benefit the country? And should we worry that corporate mining interests and federal mining interests are going to dictate what happens in Indian country with these critical minerals?
I can answer really quick. I'll try to be quick. As a former tribal leader, politicians, we like to talk. So you're right. Of those top 4 critical minerals, the vast majority lie in Indian country. And so even though I'm a markets guy, I'm also a security guy too. You know, we need as a nation, and the tribes would be the strongest partners in protecting our domestic security, our energy security, our mineral security by mining in the United States. And so, although I'm a markets guy, and we should be able to purchase these things from our allies, but you know, increasingly our allies are not there for us now because we're not there for them with these tariffs and stuff. So I think we can't nearshore anymore. We need to domestically produce these in Indian country. The path to I use the term energy evolution. I don't use the term energy transition. We're actually evolving our uses of energy, and so and critical minerals will play a strong role moving forward into that. So, but what we need in Indian country, you know, anecdotally, we know that these minerals exist in Indian country, but we haven't actually done much of the testing, the research and development to actually determine the size of the reserve and the resource. And then when we can do that, then we'll know what the valuation of those resources are. Are we talking about tens of millions, hundreds of millions, tens of billions of dollars? When we're talking about copper, tens of billions of dollars most likely. We're talking about some of the rare earths and other critical minerals, tens of millions of dollars because their prices are artificially low, and so but we don't know. So I'll end with that, is that in Indian country we need the information. We need our federal partners, USGS, our state partners, our trustee, Interior, to spend those resources in partnership with us to help determine our resource and reserves.
I want to tack on that question, Rich, by noting that Indian country also has lots of wind and sun, in part because of the history reservations were put on land that wasn't very attractive for agriculture. It tends to be very windy and arid, so hence sunny. Indian reservations also have a lot of shale beneath them. It wasn't discovered when boundaries were set. Conventional oil and gas was more likely to be known, but not the shale that can be fracked. So Indian country has a lot of shale deposits with valuable oil and gas. Statistical comparisons, when you compare land next to Indian reservations with Indian reservations, I mean, it's really apparent. You almost don't need statistical comparisons. You just look at a map, and there's like a hard boundary and very little development on reservations of both renewables and fossil fuels. Why is that, Rich, and is it a problem?
Okay. Well, thank you, Nick. Thank you to the Hoover Institute for inviting us to join you all today. And you know, with respect to everyone here, you know, in my mother language, you know, ewa nic ashk ko strana ko pishna ijako ewa ko ishto puchti emishe ko makutsa Mutet Sakoish puts the M Shakatawa, Shaptoy, the Rash, Hemaiko, Hashit, Shakoyot, Shkoiach, Hemaiko Pasha Strayach. I just, thanked our mother, our creator, that she gave us another day to all be here together, to be in peace. And I hope that our families, our children are experiencing a peaceful moment as well, that we're able to see another day of life. And that, those that are in our military, that if, overseas or wherever they may be, our young men and women, that they're not in harm's way, that they're also experiencing a safe, peaceful moment as well. So I just thanked her for that gift that she's given us this morning. I think that jumping back first, to the sovereignty piece, because I think it influences whether when we get to the wind and the minerals and everything else that my brothers have talked about here. Like the energy transition or energy evolution, I see a sovereignty transition. We need to transition from being sovereign to being significant. I think sovereignty has demonstrated our ability to self-determine, but significance demonstrates our ability to execute. You can self-determine all day long, but if you have $0, you're only as sovereign as you can afford to be. And I think energy, resources, those are going to transition us to being significant. Why I also started with our language. I'm from the Pueblo of Laguna tribe, which is one of 19 pueblos in New Mexico. When I think about minerals, wind, sun, everything that's in the earth, everything that's on the earth, including us, everything that's around the earth, the wind, the sun, the atmosphere, the cosmos, we're all created by the very same power that allows our heart to beat. We're all of one source. All those gifts are for our use. That's our teaching. Whether it's uranium, whether it's wind, whether it's water, it's for our use to prolong life. So I believe that the ability to access those resources for our benefit, again, wind, rain, sun, uranium, copper, we have to be able to use our sovereignty in a way that doesn't position us to be standing there saying, Mother, may I? We have to do the things that CJ's talking about. We have to stand up. We have to demonstrate our significance. And we have to be able to partner with institutions like this, as well as industry. We have to grow our capacity. Capacity meaning our young people, and whether it's engineering, the sciences, research. But we also need to think globally. We can't think just right here. When I say globally, in our language, whether it's in ceremonial settings, council meeting starts, formal family meetings, there's this phrase we use. Meaning, all land, all life in this world is the purpose of our work. It doesn't say just my tribe or CJ's tribe. It's all people, all land, all life. That our mother carries us in her basket. Meaning, that is what we work for. Those that are waiting to come into this world. That's the purpose of our work. Whatever's left over, maybe I might get a little of. the minerals, the wind, all these things are a part of that work. One of them mentioned the environmentalist. I've seen our tribe at one point, some of you may know, we had the largest open pit uranium mine in the world from 1952 to 1981, right? And so right now, uranium in our community is the devil, right? Nobody, I mean, you say uranium, everybody blows up. And it has created some challenges, health challenges, environmental challenges. But when I look at it, our mother put that here on this earth for a good reason. We're the ones that didn't create it right? Because when I say 1952 to 1981, EPA didn't even exist till 1970, 71. So we were already 20 years into it with no safety elements. Nobody said you couldn't take yellow cake home, right? So I think those are going to be the things that, when I get back to the question of wind, sun, minerals, water, those are all gifts that are here for our use. I say that from a cultural side. From a secular side, how do we use sovereignty? Right now, we use it as a shield, not as a sword, right? So we need to make that transition and that transformation from being mere sovereigns to being significant. And I'll close my comment by saying, when I think about markets, prior to contact, they say our native nations were vibrant. We had vibrant economies. But it was not because we were just trading and bartering things. We were trading knowledge. We were trading information. It was an open source society. When contact was made and the atrocities that happened, we went to a closed system. We've not opened back up. So you have this closed society in an open source system. And I think that's hurting our marketability. We can't scale because we're closed. So I would just share those thoughts.
Can I just say, just add to that, what Rich didn't mention, is so to fully answer the question, but what we've done, so I represent, CJ and I, we co-founded the National Tribal Energy Association, which represents the 4 largest energy producing tribes, Crow, Navajo, Southern Ute, and 3 affiliated tribes in the Bakken. Our NTEA partnered with the Colorado School of Mines, the Payne Institute, and we created the Native American Mining and Energy Sovereignty Initiative, which Rich is the director of. And so this is being proactive, right? When CJ mentioned being reactive, much of Indian country for the last 150 years plus, we've been reactive. But this is one of the first proactive measures that we've done in the last year or two, is to create this initiative, to start being part of the solution towards helping out with this energy transition on the energy and the mineral side. We raised $1 million for scholarships for Native students to attend the School of Mines from various mining and energy companies. And so we're trying to create a pipeline of students to start solving some of our problems that we have here in Indian country, because a lot of times on a lot of these conferences, a lot of the tribal people that you'll come across, all we're doing is complaining. We're so poor, we're so dependent on our great white father in D.C. But we have the means, we have the tools to be self-sufficient, to be truly sovereign, to be significant, like Rich says. We just need a little bit of a jump start from our partners the feds and our academic partners as well. So sorry to go long-winded, but I wanted to add that.
Could I add?
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, to what Rich has said, to be significant, the Crow tribe ever since, gosh, I'm 51 years old. When I was born in 1973. That was the first year we loaded out a train full of coal and sent it off to the Sherco power plant in Minnesota. So 51 years, we worked in this area, and to be significant, we brought in the money. We got away from the depending on the federal government, so much, and then we start, generating our own wealth through our leases, through our timber sales, through what oil we do have developed, and it was developed before the shale. So I mean, we still, and I'm one of the rare mineral owners on our reservation, and I own a share in the Otis well on our reservation as well. I mean, just to be proactive, we've always wanted to, create, opportunities for ourselves as tribe. The Yellowtail Dam was built because the Crow tribe created at the time, way back, the Crow tribe created the Crow Diversion Dam, and that created the ability for, the tribe to start irrigating our lands. And so, like when I went back to, telling you that Indian policy, they wanted to turn us into farmers. They just want to just turn us into farmers. You guys do this, you guys do that. And Carlisle did a really good job of, checking out all the, like following up on all those students, how much oxen, draft horses, how much money they have in the bank versus how much homes. I had a grandfather named Joseph Stewart. He owned 3 homes. He owned a store. He owned 12 oxen. He had 2,500 in the bank. He had cattle. He had draft horses and equipment. And that was all because, Carlisle documented that. And afterwards, but it comes to a point where you're doing so good, they take it away from you. And speaking to these issues, I mean, it just, it's a problem we face that, it's a different story on Indian land to try to develop these resources, because at a time when you're dealing with 49 steps, when we're dealing with any other resource, it's 4 agencies, and the review process is 180 days per agency, and when you're dealing with coal, you're dealing with another 180 days with MSHA or OSHA and all of them, and dealing with SMACRA, dealing with all of this, it's another 180 days. So I mean, after you get to through the reviewing process, all your estimates, all your stuff is all outdated, and then it's just, it's back to square one. And so when being the largest, owner of the largest deposit in a nation, a private owner, yet we're only averaging 6.5 million tons of coal because of the bureaucracy, because of the policy. Our neighbors to the south of us were enjoying our ancestral lands and pumping out 250 million plus coal off, coming out of the Wyoming there, and yet the Crow tribe was the one being demonized for the use of our coal, and yet we weren't just doing it to make money, we were doing it to feed our families and subsidize our programs and prop up our governments, so we can, be a productive group in society that didn't have to depend on the federal government for everything. We wanted to create, wealth for ourselves that we're able to create the ability to benefit ourselves, so everyone else around us benefit. And we have studies. I paid for studies from Harvard, and they've looked at, and we've took it to the Hill, and just in our little coal mine in our region, to the 5th ripple, we were in the billions. And when you look at Navajo, when you mention Navajo had NGS, Crow tribe had our coal mine, and then they have Gallup Walmart, and then you have King Avenue Walmart in Billings, Montana. They're both superstores. They're not just the little Walmarts you see around here. They're both superstores. And so one year, Gallup will be Global One. One year, The next year, maybe King Avenue will be Global 1. But it was always like this, and the comparisons were because Navajo was pumping coal, and they had workers there, and they were all buying from Walmart, and they were doing, just the market. And same thing with Billings, Montana. The Crow tribe contributes so much money to that town. Billings, Montana, we're only 3 miles away. The corner of our reservation is just only 3 miles away from Billings, just right there. And so everybody comes to Billings, and guess what? Everybody goes to Walmart. And so when the coal years were good, even as little coal as we were pumping out, yet we created a Global 1 and Global 2 scenario for Sam Walton. And I think he was pretty happy with that, So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah. Thank you. I have one more question, and then we'll go to the audience. But my question is a doozy. Universities across the country are scrambling in fear of losing lots of federal grants, and so too are some in Indian country that are worrying that funding sources that Indian country has had for decades, federal grants through the Department of Interior, Department of Energy, the EPA, are going to be gone. And this is particularly significant, I think, is because tribes don't always have clear taxing authority. So I want to ask if the fear of losing grants means American Indians really want some dependency rather than full self-sufficiency. And I want to ask if federal grants have been the route to prosperity and to energy development. And if not, what's the pathway? So a provocative question to end with.
So I'd say, I'll start. I said, as we mentioned, the mandates, just like in our normal society, mandates are limitations. They don't provide options, as the other speakers have said before. And it's the same for Indian country. I mean, I've thought a lot about this what's going on with this administration. And CJ and I, we advised the first Trump administration on a lot of energy issues in Indian country. And so, but it really is thought provoking, because I think if the cuts that are been proposed stay, it's going to be it's like throwing a kid or a person into a cold bath water. That's what's going to happen. Is that Indian country is going to be at a fork in the road and decide: are we going to stay dependent? Do we want to continue to be dependent on the federal government, or are we going to go and make our way and truly be sovereign? But like Rich said, it's really, do we want to be significant again? We were significant once at the beginning of this nation. We were in the Declaration of Independence. We were merciless savages, is what we were called, right? I don't mind being called a merciless savage, because that means you're significant. They're afraid of you. Somebody's afraid of you and takes you seriously. And so we haven't been taken seriously for a long time, for over 100 years. And so I think we're at that crossroads. Do we want to be taken seriously and be significant, or do we want to continue to be dependent on the federal government? And I think all 574 tribes, each of those leaders has to make that decision. And I opt to be significant. And that's difficult, right? It's having an impact on my business as a private business, as a consultant. A lot of my business is dependent on Department of Energy, on federal government contracts, subcontracts and awards and things. And so it is affecting me. And so we're having to take a hard look at our finances and tighten our belts and so, but Indian country as well. And I think, even though it's not something that I would have wished upon us, but I think that now that it's here, I think it's a wake up call that we need to take seriously.
Rich, I had the benefit or the curse, however you want to look at it, to serve as governor for our tribe for a number of years. I've also served as lieutenant governor. I've served in our tribal council. We don't have a system of, if you can't declare candidacy, you can't campaign. As a matter of fact, if you do those things, you're kind of shunted, you're not looked upon very kindly. It's up to the people to decide who they want to see on the ballot. Once your name goes on the ballot, you still can't campaign. It's up to the people. But you still get all the challenges and all the criticism. I didn't spend one penny to be governor, right? So I share that because for tribes, and to the question of the resources, if you know one tribe, you know one tribe. We're all different. There's 574 tribes across the country. Some are doing very well. Some continue to struggle. Politics, resources, all these different things come in. And so, about 10 years ago at the Reservation Economic Summit in Vegas, President Begay was there from Navajo Nation. As a matter of fact, I was governor at the time, and he made a interesting comment because there were challenges that BIA was facing with federal cuts at the time. And he told the audience there, several thousand people, including tribal leaders, this is the beginning of the end of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Leapfrog to today, and you're seeing all these cuts, right? And it does beg that question, how dependent are we as tribes? Whereas on one hand, we're saying we're sovereign. The other hand, we're saying we need the federal dollars. Which is it? Or is there a balance? Because even states rely on a certain amount of federal dollars. So it's not a bad thing. It's how do you create that equation, the right equation? Right? And so I always say in Indian country, sovereignty is a mile wide and an inch deep. Because the sovereignty only applies to the tribal government. It doesn't apply to us as individuals. We're not sovereign. Tribal governments, tribes, we don't have economies. We have programs and services. Our tribal entities, our tribal enterprises, their primary purpose is to generate revenue, to give to the tribal government, to provide services. The tribal government doesn't invest in my company or these guys' organization. The innovators don't reside in the tribal council, they're in our communities. When I was governor, I would always remind that our tribal council chambers are really designed to say no. They don't empower. They don't enable. So this year, last time I was here in January, we were talking about the Public Law 93-638. This is the Public Law 93-638, for those of you that may not be familiar with it, is the Indian Self-Determination and Education Act that was put in place in 1975 with the idea that this is a tool to address poverty, to help tribes build economies and do on their own. Here we are 50 years later. Are we any better off? Some pockets, yes, some others, no. And so I think this is going to be a really important time to reimagine how do we go forward. Do we go forward on the idea that the government's supposed to do for me? Well, let's stop talking about sovereignty if that's our mindset. And really, let's hone in on the dependency model. Now, if we want to be sovereign, let's figure out what that means and what's going to be my responsibility to that outcome. And like I said, I started with my comments with my language. Language is powerful. Words matter. Tribes are defined by poverty. CJ mentioned grant funding. You go after grant funding, the worse off you are, the better chance of funding. They don't fund success. In our language, we don't even have a word for poverty. You can describe it, but we don't have a word that directly translates to mean poverty. By the same token, we don't have a word that directly translates to mean sovereignty. You can describe it. The closest I would come to oyuke, meaning our obligation to do our part, to contribute. So we really need to think about it differently going forward. And so resources, the federal funding resources, are definitely a help, but they shouldn't define us. And so I think, in a long-winded way to answer next question, we need to use this opportunity, or this crisis, if you will, to identify unprecedented opportunities. So I think it was Churchill that said, right, never let a good crisis go to waste, right? And we're there. This is a great opportunity to reimagine how we go forward. So that's how I would respond to that.
We have time for one or two questions.
So this was very interesting. But it sounds like there's sort of a unity or uniform objective across tribal nations in terms of development. And I've been following a big copper mine opportunity or whatever near Tucson. And it's been controversial. It gets closed. Anyway, but the reason I'm mentioning it is one of the arguments that's presented against it is that the mine will despoil sacred lands. And so it seems like there is at least a constituency in the neighboring tribes not to have development. So I was wondering, how important are those, and how do you deal with those differences of opinion within a tribe?
Well, I'll answer a little bit to that. I'll leave a little bit for my colleagues here, but we were looking at an area there, and of course our energy partner is Westmoreland. And so coming into the reservation, we've never really tapped into the reservation coal reserves just yet, because all of our reserves that we were getting was in the ceded strip area. And so when we started tapping into the reservation, then there was an area there just right within the reservation, not even half a mile in, just right there, where it was probably one of the biggest cultural sites and in I don't know, in the nation, I don't know about the world, but there was over 40,000 tools there that they found. There was I think there was an estimated roughly like 2,000 buffalo, and they broke up all the bones. I don't know what was done there, but they put it in one pit. There was no heads, and then there was it was a ceremonial site. It was a mega site, and when they went in there and they started digging it up, to try to establish the take the topsoil off, get to the A topsoil, get to the B topsoil, and then of course separate and get ready for drilling and blasting and so forth. That place got damaged, and they got the government tried to blame the tribe. The tribe was like, whatever, you guys are the guy, you guys are the one who signs off on this place, So it wasn't the tribe. Then they tried to pin it on Westmoreland, but the government signed off on the whole thing. So the deepest one in the pockets is the one that's saying, no, it's not me. So yeah, I mean, we're dealing with stuff like that, and there's times we can go in and around those areas like that, and it's up to the tribe. It's up to the tribe for these sites. Now this area here was developed. They're putting it. They're not doing it. They're putting it back. They're putting it back. I don't know if they're putting it back in the right way, because no one knows the old ceremony back then from when they did all this, and they don't know what ceremony it was, but it was definitely Crow, and it's just something that every tribe is going to have to deal with, and if you want to develop and get resources and get off the federal whatever. So this is something that we're dealing with as well. And so to your question, it's basically up to the tribe. And, you know, then again, I can say, shoot, this is sacred to me. You know, I mean, I don't know. What do we say here? You know, we want to develop. We want to get away from the federal government. And as Rich said, I mean, I'm in total agreement. The federal government should be a help. We've already agreed in treaties back, you know, when we first met each other, to agree to help each other. Now, why are we depending on the federal government? And why is the federal government stymieing us from development where we can't be a help to the government? We can only be a ward, and we can only depend on them. And that's what it seems like they want us to just depend on them and not be a help. Now, some of this money can go to research and development, you know, to help us and assist us. But then you look at MHA Nation, you look at the Southern Utes, they're making their wealth off their resources, and they created these big accounts, these growth funds and huge monies, you know. But then again, there's the federal government saying, why don't you try out for this grant? We'll give you this, we'll give you this, we'll give you that. It's not so much where they're trying to compete. Now the federal government, because these tribes have more money than them, they turn around and say, let's help you. Whereas if you don't have the resource revenue, you're not there yet, and you depend on the federal government to go after some of this money to try to get the ball rolling in some areas. Then they turn around and they're kind of ornery to you about things, you know. Then they want to say, what you going to do? You're going to hurt the environment. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. You know, in this last administration, the federal government under Biden hit the Crow tribe with $75 million in penalties because of environmental issues, penalizing on money that they owed us, that they would not release to us because we could not draw down. And we were under critical high risk and no pay, sanction 2 of the federal government. They created that. You see? BIA comes in and they'll start all kinds of trouble with the tribes, with particular tribe or tribes. And then they turn around and back off. And when you don't go to your trustee and say, hey, help us out with this issue, they'll be like, no, that's a tribal affair. They're the one that started it, you know? And so this is something that I think we need to kind of start thinking about and getting away from. And it's true. You go to any of these, like NTEA, everybody gets up and they get on their soapbox and they preach about what their issues or what's important to them. But if you have the most suicide on your reservation, you're going to get the money. You have the most cancer, you're going to get that money. You have the most diabetes, you're going to get that money. You get the point. So we're not for a race for the top. They don't put you and they don't create a system that allow tribes to want to come to the top and be partners as we have agreed to with treaties. They put us in a position where we have to fight for the bottom. And I refuse to go to NTEA anymore. So thank you.
So CJ and Daniel and Rich will be around for the rest of the day. I'm sure they'd love to talk with you more. Thanks to the three of you for a fantastic session.